Hey, friends, welcome back to the Big Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Tricia Brouk, founder of the Big Talk Academy, award winning director, producer, and author. And this is episode 575. This week, I am joined by the incredible Brooke Seim. I had the honor of mentoring and supporting Brooke when she took my stage at the Speaker Salon Showcase, and it was a privilege to witness the powerful and deeply personal Big Talk that she shared with us. You can go back and listen to that on episode 561. In addition to being a transformational speaker, Brooke is a chef, advocate, writer, and she's a gymnast. I've seen her do it, whose work on antidepressant withdrawal has appeared in the Washington Post, New York Post, Psychology Today, and many more. Her memoir, which is amazing, May Cause Side Effects, is the first book on antidepressant withdrawal to hit the mass market. Brooke is a Food Network Chopped champion, founder of the newsletter Happiness is a Skill, and creator of the It Bucket. I'm super excited for you to hear everything she has to say with me today. Enjoy, everybody. Let's do this. Brooke, I am so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome to the Big Talk.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. For everyone who is tuning in, Brooke is an incredible human being, speaker, author, advocate, and I am honored to call her a friend. She and I met probably a little more than a year ago, and I had the privilege of supporting Brooke at the Speaker Salon in New York City, and have continued to support and watch you grow. And I am always in awe of how you show up, and I'm so excited that you're here with us today.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here too. Like I said before we started recording, we got this on the books so long ago that it's a pleasant surprise and to talk again. So I'm happy.
Yeah, me too. When I think about backstory, whether it's when I read a script or I'm reading a book and I learn about a character, I approach these conversations in the exact same way. So I would love for you to share with our audience what your backstory is. You can take us as far back as you like, that has led you to this moment in time right now with me.
Right now. Uh, I love this question. I love looking back and connecting the dots and kind of trying to figure out where the really big pivot points were. And it's funny because I wrote a book called May Cause Side Effects that came out in 2022, and it is about a year I spent in very severe antidepressant withdrawal after being medicated as a kid. So I was medicated for my entire adult life for 15 years. And then for a variety of reasons, I had to come off of these drugs. And the doctor I was seeing didn't really know what she was talking about. And she pulled me off too quickly. And I was plunged into severe withdrawal. And when that was happening, I certainly didn't think that I would write a book about it or, speak about it or, be here. But as it turned out, I'll tell you a funny story. I had made when I was recovering from not only the years of depression, but from the withdrawal. And I had realized that over the years, I had developed a tendency to say no. It was just that was my automatic reaction was no because. And so about as I was recovering, I started to realize I was saying no. And as a result, I was spending most of my time in my apartment doing puzzles alone. And I realized that was, no way to live all the time. So I started a little project called the Yes Quest, where I said yes to literally every single yes or no question that was asked of me. And I had a grand plan to do it for a year. I did it for 50 days and just watched what happened. And to everything, if they asked if I wanted coffee or creamer and sugar in my coffee, I said yes, even though I don't take sugar in my coffee. I had to get better at asking questions in order to not get myself in a trap. But I would say most of the life around this was actually not particularly remarkable, except in a handful of ways. And one of the ways was that I had published a cookbook with my old bakery because I was a chef by trade. And the literary agent at the time, I was talking to her and she kind of was asking, updates, what was up. And I told her about my experience with withdrawal and I'd been traveling. And she goes, "Oh, I think maybe I could sell a book about that. Do you want to write a book?" And I was like, "Oh my goodness. The answer is no. I have no job. I don't know how to write this kind of book, but I have to say yes." And so I said yes. 5 years later, we have a book come out, and that little exercise has actually really changed my life because I'm much more likely to say yes to things that seemed really big, and with too many difficulties. But I've learned that I can figure things out if I just put the energy in the right place through a yes. So that's how we're here.
That's amazing. I did not know that story. I thought this was super intentional and it was not a yes answer. Well, thank goodness that literary agent asked you the question because this book is so important and it's so powerful. And you using your voice inside of this book and as a media personality and as a speaker is giving people a new way to think about medication,
Mhm,
why people are being medicated, why they're being medicated underage
mhm.
without consent, all the things that you're talking about inside of the book and inside of your talk. And for those of you who are listening, episode 561, which dropped on December 29th, Understanding Antidepressant Withdrawal from the Speaker Salon Showcase, you can actually listen to Brooke's talk from the salon on the podcast. And it's again episode 561. So this is your second time being on the show, but it's our first interview, which I'm super
Yeah.
excited about. When you said yes to that and
Mhm.
you had to give voice to
Mhm.
your personal story, what was that like? And did you have to find the courage or did you automatically have the courage?
I think a little bit of both. I naively assumed it would be an easier process, an easier technical process. And so the first draft of the book I wrote was I felt I mean, I think everyone who writes the first draft of their first real book thinks their first draft is a whole hell of a lot better than it is. And then you realize pretty quickly, like, oh, this is really bad. And now the work actually starts. But so I think I had the confidence to maybe get down some of the really hard stuff because I had this naive hubris. But there was a moment that happened right around the same time I was writing that first draft. I had been traveling for a year and I came back to New York where I was living and I had an opportunity to get on a very small stage and tell a story. And this was well before you had entered my lexicon and before I considered speaking as a part of my career. And I just decided I was going to tell the story and I was so nervous about that and I practiced just until my voice was raw to make sure I could do it. And then I got up there and I told the story. And not only did it go over really well, I mean, I have critiques on my performance, but it went over well. And I had a lot of people come up and talk to me, but there was just kind of a release of finally saying a lot of this stuff publicly. So for me, I think that was the moment where I realized that not only was speaking about this publicly going to be very important for the message, but that I liked it and that I wanted to keep doing it. And it's just kind of been a seed that's grown. And I think that helped inform the book because it gave me confidence in the sense that the book was going to have to be public eventually. So the fact that I was able to tell some of the harder parts in a condensed format publicly helped fuel me through the book when I was writing more tender topics.
When you talk about the release, that there
Mhm.
was a release when you got on stage and shared your story, what does that mean to you? And for everyone who's listening or watching, I see this happen every time I work with a speaker. And that's the thing about when you're making the decision to speak your truth and to share your personal story, something happens. And I would love for you to describe what that meant for you.
Yeah. I think it has to do with the fact that when you're sharing something deeply personal or something hard, there's you tell yourself a big story about how other people are going to react to it because you are convinced somehow makes no sense, but you're convinced that they're going to care as much about it as you do. And I don't say that in order to say, oh, nobody cares about your story. I say it to kind of remind people that we are the whole universe. That's how we experience the world. And the person you're talking to is their whole universe. It's going to go through a filter and come to them and it will affect some people deeply and it'll kind of bounce off others. But the bottom line is that you're with them for a matter of minutes. It's a very transient thing. And then they're going to go back to whatever their little problem is and go back on their life. And I think if you can remove the pressure and realize that you're putting something out into the world, but it's transient, it's going to diffuse into the ethers. It doesn't have to be as big of a thing. At least that's where it was for me. It was more about the realization that, once I did this for myself, then it was about doing it for other people and figuring out the message to do that in a way that's most effective. And it's that first talk or that first essay, whatever you're doing, where you're doing it for yourself in order to get it out of you, that's really scary. But it's because you build it up for yourself, not because anybody else is expecting anything, really.
I love that you're pointing out that other people don't have expectations, that they're
Mhm.
imposed personal expectations. And I think that is connected to why you care about it
Mhm.
and that you do care about it.
Yeah.
When you go back to that moment, because we're going to talk about the speaker salon experience as well.
Sure.
When you go back to that moment where you got on that stage with your voice that was raw and you
Mhm.
shared for the first time, how did you prepare physically, emotionally, mentally to share that? Because it's a very intense story.
Yeah, it's an intense story. And so, two things. One, like you, I was very serious ballet dancer, so I did have the built-in, you know, code of being comfortable on a stage. I know stage right, stage left, the lights. I wasn't surprised when you can't see the audience, so I was really grateful to not have to learn that or be surprised by that. So I do feel like I had a little leg up there. And then the other thing, honestly, from a memorization standpoint, I just went back to high school English where we had to memorize poems and, all those things that we thought would never matter in life. And the strategy I remember using for memorizing literal epic poems in high school and AP English was once a day you basically pick the amount of lines you have and then count them like individual sentences, and then you backdate by that many days, and each day you just memorize one new line and you just layer it on top. So not only does it start off really easy, you just remember the first line on day one, but it's low pressure, and then you just recite it. And I honestly, I recite it in the shower, in the bathtub. Those are my two main rehearsal spaces, are uh, in the shower.
That's amazing. And that is so perfect because there's nothing romantic about
Mm-mm.
memorization. You can't get around it. And it's just like speaking to another ballet dancer. It's the pliés. You
Yep.
have to do the pliés
Yep.
for sure.
Yep.
That's awesome. When you think about that moment of getting on stage, okay, you were prepared, you let go of external expectations, and then you said just a second ago that you liked it.
Yeah.
What about that moment? I enjoyed being on stage dancing as well, but we didn't say anything.
No,
So
it's
what about being on stage and sharing your story did you like in that very first moment?
I have to admit, I don't know if it's that profound. I think it might just be a little bit vain. I like the attention. I like having a spotlight on me, and I like performing. I don't really care what what
That's
what
awesome.
vehicle it is. Especially now that I've gotten more comfortable with it and I don't feel that, tightness in my throat about, oh my God, what's the audience gonna think when I say this horrible thing or this to me? Once I got over that, then it's just like we're performing, we're entertaining, even if we're sharing a really difficult thing or we're trying to teach, we're still there to entertain. And I think that's interesting to me. I like being able to kind of be the master of an audience, whether or not that's through speaking or dancing or art, whatever it is. I just like it.
Yeah, and for those of you who have not yet followed Brooke on Instagram, she does this whole adult gymnastics thing that I'm obsessed with. And so this ties into her love of performing and entertaining. And I can't get enough of you falling off of balance beams. And I'm not saying because you're getting hurt. I'm saying because you're so risk taking and like what you're doing is incredible. So I do want to speak to this because being on stage requires a responsibility. And what
Mhm,
you're talking about
mhm.
is the performance aspect.
Yeah.
Anybody who wants to be a great speaker, hear what Brooke is saying. You are on stage to perform, to entertain, to inspire, to educate, all the
Mhm.
things. But if you think you're going to get on stage and show up mediocre and show up as an unrehearsed person, you're wasting the platform.
Mhm.
So I feel the same way as you. It's our responsibility and our job to take the audience on a ride.
Mhm.
And that means we need to be in command. So
Mhm.
how did you transfer from being the dancer who had the audience in the palm of your hand
Mhm.
to the speaker? And I know this answer because I worked with you, but I want you to share it with our audience. To how did you transfer from that to the speaker who had the audience in the palm of your hand?
It definitely took a little bit of practice for sure. I think the first time I spoke publicly, I probably spoke twice as fast as I normally spoke now. So I think the first rule for me is to just slow down. But the reason why I slow down is not so much so you're speaking at a slower rate for the audience to process, which is a reason to slow down. But for me, it's a reason to have a moment to feel the energy of the person or the room. And at this point, I can literally feel when I'm going into uncomfortable territory and when I need to pull it back. And it changes, right? An audience of on Monday may have a completely different limit than the audience on Wednesday. And you're not going to know because if you're just looking at them, they're all just sitting there staring at you. To me, it's a feeling, it's an energy. It's, if you haven't been on a stage, I would say it's similar to if you're at a concert with a lot of people or a sporting event and you can just feel the energy of the crowd get excited or deflated, or when they're distracted. If the team sucks and they're not paying attention, you can feel that in the audience. And there's just you kind of have to just hone your little radio tuner and realize where it's pointing. And I can't really verbalize it any better than that, other than saying it takes time and you have to be multitasking. You have to be able to speak while you're feeling, which is tricky.
Right. And we've talked about this. It's being in a scene with the audience.
Yeah.
Even though they're not speaking back to you and you don't have lines that are directly in relationship to what they're experiencing, you're
Hmm.
playing a scene with the audience.
Hmm.
And I love how you described feeling their energy. That's
Hmm.
absolutely part of playing that scene. And so when they are sitting there with their arms crossed and they're
Hmm.
looking at their phones, you
Yeah.
realize, oh, I'm not getting what I want from them with it, which is simply their attention.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of energy that I think you can play off of, you can use, you can allow to deflate. So, as somebody who's a seasoned performer,
Mhm.
what would you say to our audience, Brooke, about when you don't have the attention of your audience, or you've pushed somebody's button? Because I know that you do that
Yeah.
uh, frequently and intentionally, and it's
Yeah.
one of the things I love about you. How do you get that audience to do what you want?
I think I have not had a situation yet where I've so lost them and can't get them back. I remember I was speaking at a tech event a few years ago, and so everyone was just automatically on their laptops, and they started on their laptops, and I noticed as the talk went on, more people were closing them or putting their phone down, and I was gaining attention as we went through. And for me, humor is one of the biggest ways to do that, especially if you're telling a difficult story. If you can find a way to kind of just break them out, like make them pay attention to you by making a joke. And it's especially relevant if it can't be a joke about you or your topic or your talk, really, because then that's funny to you. It has to be funny to them. So I remember at this tech event, it was a WordPress event, and I opened the talk by saying, I'm not sure that I should be here because I use Squarespace.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And I got them all to laugh and pay attention, right? And I kind of knew I was going to be on an uphill battle. And so it kind of requires you to really just pay attention to not just your talk and what you're doing, but to the whole scene in which you're participating in, Like it's important to know if you're following five speakers on really heavy topics or if you're going to be the first one with a heavy topic. It's important to kind of know, okay, who might be in the audience? Are they here? Are they just friends and family members trying to support somebody you don't know? Or are there people off the street? Are they here to learn about coding and you're talking about antidepressant withdrawal, how do you bridge that? I think it's just context and really intentional thinking. And I think you can practice this just by on one-on-one conversations with people in your life by trying to make connections to what they're talking about, really active listening, paying attention to how you feel when they're talking. Like, do you zone out when they're talking? Why? Right? Are they zoning out when you're talking? Why? It's just kind of this constant curiosity that's sort of at the front of your mind, but also a lot just processing unconsciously.
That's incredible. And everything that you're sharing is so important for our listeners, talking about masterful speaking. And you are truly a masterful speaker. I've seen you speak a lot. And it's true, Brooke. I want to touch on the talk that you delivered at the Speaker Salon. And the reason that I want to touch on it is because the process that I saw you go through was fantastic. And back to the humor, everybody be sure to tune in to episode 561 or go to the YouTube channel if you're not watching there already and watch Brooke's talk because she uses humor perfectly in this talk. And it's a heavy talk. And
Mhm,
that's another thing is be mindful. If you're not funny, don't try to be funny.
mhm,
You have to actually be funny if you're going to add
mhm,
humor to a talk that is a heavy topic.
mhm,
But what was fascinating about this process for me is that you started off with a talk that was primarily about antidepressant withdrawal.
mhm,
And then over the course of 3, 4 weeks,
mhm,
it transformed as you transformed into a talk about love.
mhm.
How was that for you? Did you feel resistant? Did you feel open? Was it a surprise?
I I would love to say that that was something that happened on I think it happened on week 3 or I think it was 3.
Yeah.
I would love to say it happened on week, after 3 weeks, but to be perfectly honest, I've been working to that conclusion for 5 years. I had
Oh,
been trying to figure out how to say this and what this meant in a w in a very succinct way for so long, and I mean, I published a book without saying that. I was still wondering what this boils down to on my publication day, And I think it came to me on the subway. And I think one of the things I chose to do before I came to New York and was to consciously stop learning things. And the reason why was because I'm very curious. I love to read. I listen to a lot of podcasts and I felt like before I came to New York for that long stretch of time, I felt really saturated and like there were so many ideas and there was so much going on in the world and there is so much going on in the world that I couldn't tell where my thoughts began and other people's ended, and it just felt too noisy around me. So I said, okay, I'm going to do the most counterintuitive thing and actively stop learning, actively stop paying attention to anything current events related. And I'm going to do that in the center of the world in New York. And so it was, I wouldn't even let myself really listen to music. So if I was just sitting on the subway, I'm just sitting on the subway looking at people, right? I mean, it was an active, very active kind of intentional meditation for a long time. And I didn't expect it to have such a profound impact, but what it did was it just finally allowed my own thoughts and intuition and feelings to come through. So not only has it honed me better so I can feel my audience like we were talking about, but when I'm writing, when I'm editing, and this kind of thing comes out of left field about love, and then I got the sentences, sentence in, I just kind of looked at it and I was like, I don't know if this is good or not. So I just kind of let it be, and then I think maybe the next day is when I did the talk in rehearsal. But that I don't think that would have happened had I still been filled with so much noise, and it felt like productive noise, but I don't think it actually was. So I've taken that lesson along with me too.
that is so awesome that you're sharing this because I'm finding a parallel to the numbing of antidepressants and the
Mhm.
numbing of
Yeah.
self-development or
Yep.
too much music or constantly trying to learn. I mean, they
Mhm.
both can have a numbing effect that prevent us from tapping into that intuition
Yep.
or that knowing.
Mhm.
And that's the first time I've heard a speaker share the decision to actively not learn anything new
Yeah.
in
It's
order to tune in.
well, and it's such a it's not that you're not actively learning anymore. The difference is you're learning from yourself. And I think you have to understand that. And my whole life has been completely transformed since making that decision. And I'm not consciously not learning now, but consciously learning a lot less and in more intentional chunks of time. And I mean, my creativity has just exploded. I'm so much more calm. I'm less, reactive. I have a lot more trust in myself
That
and the universe, and that things are going to come through. And it's been pretty astounding.
that's incredible. That's the exact word I was going to use is trust.
Mhm.
How did you come to trust yourself on this journey?
That that again is just a result of, I think it was writing the book. I had spent my process in writing. I would kind of because I was still, working kind of part time, and so what I would do is I would spend a few months really intensely writing, and then I'd put the book in a drawer for another couple months, go make some money, come back to the drawer, write it again. And I did that on purpose because, at least the way my life was and the way I needed to write, I needed to be really immersed in the topic. And so I got very used to effectively the feeling of flow, the feeling of knowing that what I was writing was maybe not perfect, maybe it was going to need some, technical massaging, but I knew the topic was right. I knew it needed to be there. And I recognize that feeling now in my whole life. It's the same feeling I feel on stage if I know I'm on the right path with them. It's the same feeling when the thing about love came in on the subway. I knew that I was on to something. It's just a familiarity. And to me, what it feels like is, it feels like a full body tingle, kind of like you lose the edges of your skin a little bit, like you're not quite sure where you are in the space.
Hmm.
And sometimes I get a little cold. Sometimes there's a little bit of a chill that kind of runs through, and it feels kind of bubbly and light, almost like you'd poured champagne bubbles through your veins and your arteries. That's kind of what it feels like. And the opposite of that is the opposite of that. It is lead. It is heavy. It is like closed, closed, closed. And if that happens, you just got to put it down, walk away.
Yeah. Well, I have had the pleasure of spending time with you in New York at the Speaker Salon, and watching you in process is truly an inspiration. And you were truly and absolutely a leader for the other participants. And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm glad.
You're welcome. You're an influential voice, Brooke.
Thanks.
Are
Yeah.
you ready for some fast talk?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. What's your favorite book?
Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut.
Amazing. Who's your favorite speaker and why?
Probably also Kurt Vonnegut. If you go through the YouTube archives, he's a gem.
Oh, amazing. How do you memorize? Well, you already shared how you memorize, so we know that. What do you do the day before you speak, whether it's on a stage or a podcast or a panel?
Not a lot at this point. I mean, if it's on stage, I'll run through it one or two times, but there's a less is more approach at that point. Like, don't overthink it.
Beautiful. Great advice. What podcast are you currently obsessed with?
I've been listening to a lot of The Art of Being Well with Dr. Will Cole, and I'm always a Tim Ferriss savant, so whatever he's doing.
Amazing. And we'll put all this in the show notes, everybody, so that you can also listen to these awesome podcasts. Brooke, thank you so much for being a featured guest today on The Big Talk. Where can our listeners and viewers get in touch with you?
You can find me all over the internet at Brooke Seim. That's BrookSiem. My book is May Cause Side Effects. It's available wherever books are sold. I encourage you to support a local bookstore if that's available to you. However, it's also available on, online and on Audible and all those platforms. And yeah, I have a little newsletter called Happiness is a Skill, where I explore a lot of the philosophy and of whatever's going on in psychiatric drug withdrawal, the skill of happiness, history of psychiatry, or just whatever books are kind of, speaking to me at the moment. So kind of subscribe at brookseim.substack.com.
Perfect. We will put all of that in the show notes as well so that you can get in touch with Brooke, and be sure to follow her on Instagram and all the socials because she's super active and it's a really, really good Instagram
Backflips all
page.
day.
Backflips all day. Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for dropping in with us today. I so appreciate you spending time with us. We know how valuable your time is, and that you choose to spend time listening to the Big Talk podcast is really special. And if you are watching this on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get access to our latest videos. If you love this episode, hit us up on Instagram. Let us know. Share the episode. Rate and review. All of that stuff helps the algorithms. So your decision to like helps us tremendously so that other people can listen to these awesome episodes. And remember, everybody, your voice matters. Big love, everybody. Until next time.